Hi, this is Mr. Chandler. Today we're going to look at 2.3, Nationalism to Sectionalism. What we were talking about in the last couple of units is westward expansion and the nationalism that resulted from westward expansion. And so in this unit we're going to talk about sectionalism and how that sectionalism developed. So first, what sectionalism is a tendency to be more concerned with the interests of your particular region than with the problems of the entire country. An example of that would be in the South, where the South is more concerned with what's happening there than with what happens in the whole country. A good example of that we've discussed in class are tariffs. South doesn't like tariffs, but tariffs are good for the North. Tariffs hurt the South. So the South thinks that tariffs are bad, though they don't really see that it could help the North, and they only see from their own perspective, which makes sense, to be honest. The reason that these places developed differently is because of geographical differences back in the early colonial days, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. The thing you really need to know, one of the things you really need to know about this unit is where each of these regions are on the map. And so I put this map up in front of you, and I have it behind me as well, although you probably can't see the one behind me. In front of you, you can see the north is basically the blue. The south is like that pink color, and then the west is over there in like the gray and the light blue, and then the lighter color of pink. So when we talk about west, it kind of changes throughout time. Originally, west was Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee, and Kentucky, and Indiana and Illinois. Later, the west is going to be Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas, Missouri. So we're going to keep moving westward as we go. And remember what we talked about the other day, one of the problems as we move westward is that some of these places are going to be a debate. There's going to be a debate over whether they should be slave or free. So on the map, you're really going to have to label each of these places. Now, this is a little bit of a review. The origins of sectionalism really start because of geography. Geography leads to the type of economic activity that they have in that area. Remember, up north, they started off with shipbuilding. And because of shipbuilding, that's what's going to lead to them having money to put into industries and factories. And so up north, it's going to be more about shipping and industries and factories. And while in the south, they have that fertile land, so the fertile land ends up causing them to have agriculture. In the west really depends on where we're talking in the west. If we're talking about the northwest, then they're going to grow stuff like staple crops like corn and wheat. That's what they grow in Ohio and Indiana. If you've ever actually driven through Ohio, you know there's a lot of cornfields in Ohio and Indiana. If you're talking about the southwest, and by that I mean like Mississippi and Alabama and Louisiana, they're going to have cash crops. They're going to grow cash crops like cotton, or some parts of Louisiana, sugar. And so that's really going to impact the way that they develop. And so because of that, that's going to really change how they believe about the whole country. They don't believe in South Carolina, their interests are very, very different than the interest of New York. And that's what sectionalism really means. So to talk about economic differences a little bit further, remember the North developed industry and finance, and they were able to put the money that they earned from shipping into industry and finance. And that's going to impact how they believe about the national bank and how they believe about protective tariffs. While the South tended to invest in slavery and agriculture, keep putting their money into that. The West tended to be agriculture, depending on where they were. Some examples of growing sectionalism are the people who work there. That's what labor means. Labor is who's going to work there. Labor in the North tended to be immigrants, mostly German and Irish, and they tend to come over with the opportunity to work in factories. And that's why German and Irish people came to the United States, was to get jobs in these factories. The South, the labor force tended to be slaves, and they tended to put a lot of money into those slaves, and that was a big part of their money investment and their capital investment. In the West, they tended to be more family farms. Depending on where they were, they might have had slaves if they were in the Southwest, like Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana, or if they were in the Northwest, like Ohio and Indiana, they tended not to have slaves. Sometimes immigrants did go to the Northwest, but it is fairly rare. Social reform is another example of growing sectionalism. The North, they really believed in education because education would help assimilate the immigrants. So they were early to have public schools. And if you remember back to the colonial days, New England that's kind of a tradition that was brought from New England, that New England wanted to educate people so they could read the Bible, and it kind of continued. Meanwhile, in the South, there was really no public education. Kids didn't go to school, they went to work on the farm. And in fact, it was even illegal to teach slaves to read. And then the West also had very little public education because, again, the kids aren't going to school, they're working on the farms. Economic differences really led to controversies over the National Bank and the protective tariff. So we'll start with the National Bank. The National Bank was opposed by both the South and the West because they believed it gave way too much power to the wealthy Northeasterners, and they instead favored state banks that would offer them cheaper loans, and so they can buy more land, and they're not going to be hugely indebted. And that's going to be a major problem. In fact, we're going to talk about that numerous times as we move forward about farmers and the need for cheap loans. And so that's an issue that's going to come back later. Meanwhile, the North is going to like the idea of the national bank because it's going to help them invest in their factories, and it's going to help them become more profitable. The protective tariff. We've talked about this quite a bit in this class at this point. The North tend to support the protective tariff because it's going to help their industries. Remember, their industries are all fairly young. They need that help to be able to compete with the foreign competition, like that's in England and France. Because those industries in England and France have been there for a while, they're able to produce goods a little more cheaply. So they need that advantage of the tariff. Our factories need that advantage of the tariff in order to compete with those places. The West ends up accepting the tariff. What happens is the North agrees to give the West some of the things they want, like internal improvements, which means like roads and canals, and also cheap land. And in return, the West is going to support the idea of the tariff. We're really talking more about the Northwest here, not the Southwest. And then the South is, of course, going to oppose tariffs like we talked about numerous times in class because it's going to hurt their economy because most of the stuff they get comes from England. And so they're not going to like that because it's going to cost more to buy their stuff from England. They also oppose internal improvements like roads and canals. They think that money should be used differently. They're not in favor of that. And that kind of sounds very similar to today too. Some other examples of nationalism is the building of the Erie Canal. This more favors like the North and the West. And it's actually going to make the South a little scared that the North and West are kind of teaming up against them, and they're going to be a little paranoid about it. Erie Canal is in New York. It's going to aid being able to ship goods from one place to another. Some of the farm products from the Northwest to the East. And then around that time, Henry Clay comes up with the American system, which we're going to talk a little bit more specifically in class because it's kind of a confusing concept. The American system is an attempt to bring the three areas of the country together to support each other. What he wants is that they're going to have a tariff in place so that we have to buy our goods from here. So basically what would happen is the South and the West would grow things, and then that would be shipped to the North, and the North would make products and ship those to the South and the West. However, that's really going to lead to a lot of distrust between the South because they're going to see the North and the West increasing their relationship and becoming more partners in the relationship, while the South is kind of feeling like they're left out. And that's going to lead to a lot of tension, which is eventually going to be manifested through the Civil War. Don't forget, that really concludes this. If you have any questions, write it down on your section, or write down on this section of your notes guide. You have to write at least one question. Make sure you also put your name on it in ink, and make sure you turn it in and take the quiz. Thank you very much for watching. Please let me know in class if you have any questions about any of this material. Thank you. Bye.